Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ICA and tonight's Artist Voice program. I'm Monica Garza. I'm the ICA's Charlotte Wagner Director of Education. So this evening's program was organized in conjunction with the ICA's exhibition, A Place for Me, Figurative Painting Now, which was organized by Mannion Family Curator Ruth Erickson. The program was also organized to coincide with June's Pride Month and Youth Pride Month in the month of May. Our evening will begin with a moderated conversation led by Ruth with featured exhibition artists David Antonio Cruz and Doran Langberg, as well as community activist and leader Grace Sterling Stowe. David is a multidisciplinary artist and will soon be teaching at Columbia University. He fuses painting and performance to explore the visibility and intersectionality of brown, Black, and queer bodies. His work has been included in various group exhibitions, including at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, El Museo del Barrio, and the Bronx Museum of Art. His fellowships and awards are numerous, and they include the Joan Mitchell Foundation, Painters and Sculptors Grant, the Queer Mentorship Fellowship, and more. Doran is a New York-based painter invested in the relationship between individual lived experiences and emotional states that are universal across social categories. His paintings have been featured in several solo and two-person shows in the United States, Germany, and the UK, as well as in various international group exhibitions. His work can be found in the collections of the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, the RISD Museum, and I'm happy to say, like David, now in the collection of the ICA for us to continue to enjoy in the years to come. Grace has been a pioneering activist and leader in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and social justice communities for over 40 years. She is the founding executive director of the Boston Alliance of Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender Youth organization called BAGLY. It is one of the oldest and largest LGBTQ youth organizations in the nation. Grace is also a founding member of several local and national youth advocacy organizations. And according to her bio, while Grace has served many roles in her community work over the past 4 decades, she remains especially honored to be known as mother, and now grandmother, by generations of LGBTQ youth. We ask that after the conversation with our speakers, when that concludes, that you remain in your seats to hear a short spoken word piece by Max McClune. Max recently graduated from Hampshire College and is associated with Bagley's Youth Leadership Committee as a BIPOC meeting facilitator, as well as a Speakers Bureau peer leader. We're very grateful to Max for sharing their work this evening. Lastly, I'd like to thank our sponsor. Support for the Artist Voice, David Antonio Cruz and Doran Langberg, is provided by the Quinn Impact Fund. And now, without further ado, please help me welcome Ruth, David, Doran, and Grace to the stage.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you for saying adieu to the sun to come into the theater a little bit and be with us. Grace, tonight is the first time that we are having a chance to meet, and it's so honored to meet you, and I'm familiar with your work for decades on behalf of LGBTQ youth. And I thought maybe tonight you could just first sort of introduce the work that Bagley does for us, for those who aren't familiar, and the sort of work that you've done on behalf of youth.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here tonight and to be on the panel, sharing this panel discussion. So I'd like to start by talking a little bit about Bagley. Bagley is the Boston Alliance of LGBTQ Youth. We were founded back in 1980, so our acronym no longer fits our name. And from the very beginning, we were founded as a youth-led, adult-supported organization. So we provide youth leadership development programs, health promotion programming, and community organizing and advocacy work led by and for LGBTQ young people. We started at a time before the internet, before a lot of the resources that are available today, both in Massachusetts and other parts of the country. And so we started as a very grassroots, all volunteer, community-based organization throughout the 80s and into the 90s. And then we grew to be a more established nonprofit with staff and a board and funding and more formally structured programs and services. We're based in Boston, but we're also statewide. We manage a network of over 15 community-based LGBT youth groups using Bagley's youth leadership model called the AGLY Network, and we provide funding and technical assistance and training and support to support young people across Massachusetts. And from the beginning, the youth of Bagley, and we retain this focus to this day, have always felt that it was important to be more than just providing social support for each other in terms of what they needed. It was certainly about finding community, reducing isolation, making friends, building connections, but it was also about creating change and making a difference. We established a Youth Speakers Bureau in our first year, and that was designed from the very beginning to train young people to do public speaking to create change in their communities. So young people have have advocated at the State House around legislation, have spoken in schools and community-based organizations, have been in the media in many different ways, talking about their lives and the needs of LGBTQ young people across Massachusetts and beyond. A lot of our work, because we've been around as long as we certainly have worked with some of the national organizations and LGBT youth organizations in other states to support the work that they do and inform the work that we do. So we're very lucky here in Massachusetts. We actually have a range of programs and services, not only Bagley and the AGLY Network, but other programs and services that address the needs of LGBTQ youth. We have the first in the nation, and I still believe the only in the nation, Massachusetts Commission on LGBTQ Youth that was first established by governor as a governor's commission and then was reestablished by the legislature, the Massachusetts legislature, and that leads a lot of the advocacy efforts. So Bagley partners with the commission and other community organizations to advocate for the needs of young people. I'm sure I don't have to say to anybody in this room, the awareness of what's happening nationally and the very direct and specific attacks on the lives of LGBTQ young people. There have been, I believe, over 268, whatever the number is, almost 300 specific legislative bills that have been filed in states across the country targeting LGBTQ young people and especially transgender youth. There's a coordinated and organized effort in nationally and in states across the country to target queer and trans people and young people in particular. And while Massachusetts, we are very fortunate to be in a blue state and a progressive state with a lot of legal protections and a lot of community and institutional and state support. Nevertheless, there's movement even in Massachusetts to change that. And we know that there are groups that are trying to infiltrate local school committees or local town leadership to one by one try to change some of these things. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge that while the high profile things that we might have heard in, say, Florida or Texas or some other states are happening, and maybe they're not quite happening in that way here in Massachusetts, nevertheless, the attempts are being made. And all of this sends a chilling effect to young people because they're hearing this, they're growing up, and they're seeing this happen, and they're watching to see, so how are adult community organizations and institutions responding? Are they taking it seriously? What are they doing? And they, of course, are having their own leadership. They're speaking out, and they're what I've always said is that, how wonderful that the younger generations know and believe that they deserve better. And as each generation builds on the leadership of the generation that came before, we hope that each generation knows that they deserve better. And so my hope is that the leadership of young people will continue and their voices will be heard. And we know that's happening both here in Massachusetts and nationally. So it's a challenging time, but also a time that I think is a particular political movement in our community where we need every single one of us to step up and find a way that we can support each other. One other part that I want to make sure that's not a part, but that is central to the work that we do is Bagley is an LGBTQ youth organization, and that has always been our focus. But we do our work through a social justice lens, particularly racial justice, gender justice, and economic justice. We see our work as inextricably linked to other movements, and recognizing that, of course, LGBTQ people are part of every community and every identity and every experience, so it's not separate. And one of the things that is most important is that no young person should have to check any part of their identities at the door. They should be able to be acknowledged and affirmed and valued for all of who they are, and that means that all programs and services, not just at Bagley, but whether they're in schools or in communities or through the cities or the states, are culturally competent to make sure that they are addressing all the needs of the young people. And again, this is something that is so gratifying to see, that we have a generation of young people who are used to affirming all of their identities and not having to separate them out and saying, I'm going to go to this program to support my queer identity, I'm going to go to this program to support my racial identity, I'm going to go to this program to support another part of my gender identity, and to recognize that wherever they are whole people, and they deserve to be acknowledged as such. So I'm as much as I sort of want to call, sort of sound an alarm that things are happening that are scary, both locally and nationally, I also continue to be hopeful that we have a generation of young people and generations that all a multi-generational movement here, that if we work together, we will succeed. So thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. Hope that's a quick overview, but happy to talk more as we move on with the panel.
Thank you so much. I did have one immediate follow-up question, which I'm thinking of bridging to our two visual artists, which is, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the ways in which the arts factor into this model of justice at Bagley, and how the arts have been a part of programs or a part of sort of advocacy and sort of visualizing things that Bagley does.
I was mentioning earlier as we were talking that young people are creative, and in so many ways, and art in the broadest sense of the term has always been part of their lives, and so Bagley at different stages of our development has tried to provide supportive environments, whether it's through spoken word, whether it's in other mediums, for young people to express themselves, because representation is so important, to see ourselves, to be able to express who we are, to see that reflected back. And that's important not only with young people and the work that we do, but it's important for all of us. It's seeing the possibility of who we are and who we could be, and until we see it or hear it or feel it or have some have some way of tapping into that, we aren't always able to fully realize who we are. So certainly Bagley values the importance of artistic expression, whether that is through some of the work that we do at Bagley or out in other ways that young people express themselves. And we've always seen that for all of the 42 years of Bagley, that many of our young people are artists. You'll see tonight one of our young people who will be up soon. And I think that I'm always heartened, because there's different ways of expressing identity and representing identity, and those different methods will reach different audiences in different ways and resonate in different ways, and it's really important.
Thank you. So David, maybe I'll turn it to you now. And the series of work that we have upstairs is a newer series called Chosen Families. And I think what was really moving to me about this work was the ways in which you sought to sort of expand the frame of togetherness, of who and how we choose to be together, of thinking of the families that we make. And I wonder if you could just, sort of introduce the series, how you came to it, and how it has sort of been an engine for a new body of work for you.
Sure. Before I get started, I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing, Grace. That's incredible.
Thank you.
So this project, I started this project as almost as a response to the beginning of the pandemic, and I've always really invited folks that I've considered my chosen family, a lot of folks that are really friends, into the studio. And it's always been a sense of performance and play in my studio. And this is an older piece, for example. This one goes back to 2006. Again, this is really thinking about that idea of family and creating those structures within my work. And so I'm just going to pause there. I started working on this project, thinking about it after moving here to Boston, and the pandemic had begun, and there was this separation where we weren't able to connect, see each other, and the idea that you would have to hide or be in a pod, and what that meant for the community, especially since how we identify and how we think about what family structures are not what they were thinking or describing, and what happens to our social spaces where we gather and come together to celebrate ourselves, to see ourselves, to just be, we're closed down and not being able to connect. And so it became, in a way, a selfish way, a project for me to figure out how to bring folks together, how to see people again. A lot of the conversations that I was having were, of course, on the phone or in Zoom. But the idea of touch, which has been so important to my work, was completely removed. This idea of what happens when you see someone and you hug or you hold hands. All these expressions of love were completely removed, or we were not allowed to manifest or perform. And so I started working on this project, and it became more about not necessarily identifying the people I wanted to bring together. Because a lot of times I pick in groups, and this time it was really about having these intimate, personal conversations. And so I would start with one person, and I would ask them what chosen family means to them. Because I feel like generationally, the idea of it means a lot of things to different people. And so, it began as like, what is it to you? What does it mean to you? How has it supported your life? How has it, changed who you are? And so they were given a choice. You can accept or not. And if you did, you had to tell me one person. And I said, well, you just give me one person that you consider your chosen family, and why. What is it about that special relationship, that group, that the things that's brought you together? And so they were given about 48 hours to pick up to 9 people. And so they had to identify the folks. They had to send me photographs, tell me why. And then it became a form of celebration. And throughout the pandemic, we've created really strict rules, how things could have been done. But part of it is actually having dinner so that we all can get together in a safe way. And then celebrate friendships, celebrate families. And a lot of the times, this was the first time people were seeing each other after a few months, maybe some as much as 6, 7 months. And so this is how the project began. And the other thing about the project, which was different, a lot of times I make costumes for my performance work. I have a lot of clothing in my studio, which it's part of this whole festive performative type thing. But this time I wanted folks to dress up as they were going out to celebrate. So it was like bring in festive wear, come out to party, this is a party. And so it becomes, this whole process it's about a 2-day project to get to this place. And so this is how the project began. And so I included this image of my mother and me, and I'll tell the story of this one. Stephanie appears upstairs multiple times. I paint a lot of folks a lot of times, and I invited Stephanie, and I did ask her, who would you pick? And Stephanie, I met her at the museum where this piece is of my mother and myself is part of their collection, and
That's the Museo Barrio.
it's Museo del Barrio, yes. And so this is one of my earlier pieces, and so when Stephanie came out, she had some difficulties, and so she's really challenging times with her family. And Carmen, who she's the guard at Museo del Barrio, took her under her wing and just really started just mentoring her, being really a mother figure. And so when she told me, I didn't, this long story, this history, and I wanted to reproduce the painting of my mother and me and reversed it. Carmen used to spend time staring at my painting for many, many months. And so she had this really special relationship to my work, and I wanted to reflect that. So this is an updated version of the painting of my mother and me. So this is how the work began and why, yeah. Some more shows up.
And can you talk a little bit about, like, even in this one, what's so striking when you're standing in front of this one, which it's upstairs in the galleries, is this yellow sock and this blue arm, right? And like these are elements that make strange those bodies, that relate those different limbs that actually belong to different people within the structure. And I wonder if you could even just talk about sort of like that decision that you made in painting this, and how, what led into that, and because that happens throughout the body of work,
Yeah.
right? Limbs are made green or
Yeah.
made blue.
Colors are really specific and really important in my work. They're like candy. I always think of like frosting, but a lot of the work plays a lot with history and the idea of fragmentation in bodies. A lot of language. I use a lot of language thinking about symbols and coding, especially queer coding, in that history of, and a lot of that really came about my performance work and how I use language, especially flipping between Spanish and English and using that language. And so a lot of the symbols, there's a lot of birds, there's a lot of butterflies, a lot of different symbols that are really used in language in Spanish and in English. But the coloring of the blue hands, I never really think of my work as political, but it is. It's impossible not to make this kind of work or make work and talk about queerness or a lot of the subjects that are, right now. The blue and the green hands became as a way to respond to the idea of the other, the alien, the way that our bodies as someone described or labeled. And so I really started thinking earlier on about the idea of immigration, how we were talking about brown bodies, black bodies, queer bodies. And so it is a way of amplifying that and talking about that, coding it within the work. But it is always the moment of touch in the work. So it's this idea of flipping that, there we go, that narrative, that language. And so it becomes really about touch and amplifying that, not running away from that moment or that thing. And so color is used that way in the work, and it's constantly loaded in that way, yeah. But it's always the moment of impact and touch.
So I'll ask one more question, though I haven't witnessed it firsthand. I know that you've described to me a certain kind of ambiance or a kind of like freedom that you seek to kind of evoke in the moment of sitting, of being painted. And I wonder if you could go to the DC family.
Yes. Oh my God.
For that one. That's not the official title. There's the official title. And just to sort of think a little bit, or to share with us a little bit, some of the experiences that sort of went into these people coming together. And I'm thinking especially in the way that oftentimes your figures are sort of turned upside down or showed in maybe like non-normative ways of sort of not the three-quarter portrait we come to expect in art history. And just sort of how that happens on the painting, but then also in the context of in your studio with real people.
For me, playing with portraiture and that idea of portraiture and the history, it's and especially painting and working with people of color and queer folks, and not being really much part of that history or being removed or disguised, because it's not that we're not there, it's disguised or coded in ways. And it's a way to subvert those ideas and play with that. Sitting wrong, to me, is the idea of like completely moving away from those ideas of society and playing with those notions of what, how we'll behave or conduct ourselves, or what is expected of us as a queer body. And so it's a process to get folks. It's actually, one of the things that I love about it is just like being able to spend time with someone and getting to know them before they enter the space. And it's really a meditative space. It's really, when I start to work, it's really quiet. We do the celebrating first, and then I talk about why I make the work that I do and why I'm so thankful that they're part of the work, and how I think of us as representing a history that, in the hopes that we cannot be erased. And so it's permanent for me, like painting becomes permanent in a sense where we know the histories in the walls, in institutions. And a lot of things can be erased, but there's something about that power behind a painting. And so placing them, it starts off really much as sketch, as spiritual, like thinking about energies, and then describing, thinking about, I collage everything before we get started. And so it becomes these fragmentations and ideas of what bodies look like. And before I get anyone to sit, I sit this way. My assistant and I get in these, and so, because it's a lot. And to get everyone into this, it took about a good 40 minutes to get everyone into, and a lot of disguising, a lot of play. Yes, a lot of trust. It's really intimate. It's really delicate, and so it's very private in a sense, because it's really much about a conversation of quietness and trust, and making sure that everyone's really comfortable in the place and really feel that beauty, absolutely. And so we have a lot of it is conversation, so that we get to that place. Yeah, it's a really beautiful. It's beautiful. I get so excited in the middle of it. I'm just like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I let folks know, this is so gorgeous. This is what I think of the world. This is right here, this moment. Exhale. So it's really incredible. And I'm so thankful that people are willing to be a part of the process and be a part of the work. I always think it's a gift that people trust my vision.
And just to end, is the Chosen Families for you, is this a series that is ongoing?
It is.
It's a series that in our new stage of the pandemic has changed for you, just to kind of bring it back to that?
I mean, it'll allow me to travel more. So some of the pieces, for example, the boys. And the other thing is that, which is change. I'm just thinking about the community in different ways, like thinking about folks intergenerational, thinking about body types was so important. And so the changes of it has allowed me to travel. So for example, being able to go to LA and see and be able to work on certain projects. So as things are changing, but it is ongoing. It's definitely an ongoing project that, I inserted some of the earlier images because like, this has been part of the work. It's always been part of the work. It's just that it's being talked about differently, and I'm thinking about it and how I arrange it differently. I mean, the worlds that are being constructed around them as a nest. That's the other thing, that each one of them is housed in a couch that wraps itself around the body as a way of shell. And so the work is ongoing. Yeah, absolutely.
Can't wait to see the next ones.
Thank you.
I know you are prolific in the studio, so I'm really excited to see the next ones.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's shift now, and I'll just bring it to Bather, and then maybe you can hand over the clicker. So this is the work that we're really grateful is now in the ICA's permanent collection of Doran Langberg. And one of the aspects that first drew me to your work was this kind of coexistence that I think happens to different degrees in different paintings, between these portions that feel more tightly painted or highly rendered with these more kind of pure color, brushwork, kind of abstract portions. And I remember when we were first in your studio, we were talking about this in terms of a kind of joyful resistance to being able to be visualized or made visible. And I wondered if you could sort of share a little bit about your work, partly in thinking about this sort of dynamic between those things that are sort of made visible and those things that are perhaps invisible or made visible through these different techniques of figuration and abstraction.
Totally. First of all, it's so great to hear from both of you. And David, I feel like we've known each other for a while, but
Yeah.
I've never really heard like a full kind of description of your work. That was really, I think so many aspects of it I identified with, and especially like working with people that are so close to me, which is kind of like the subject matter of my work and how those encounters are really personal and meaningful, and that actually like what goes on in those sessions is such a big part of what ends up being in the painting. So it was kind of beautiful to think about that through your paintings as well. Yeah, I think that's, to me, the kind of relationship between the more abstract elements of the work and the more descriptive elements of the work tie, let's say, the real, the observed world, the naturalistic language of painting, and something that's like much more emotional, internal, psychological. And I think that color, gesture, materiality, like all of those aspects of painting are such powerful tools in expressing interiority and expressing kind of the emotional state of the person that I'm painting or my emotional connection to them. So it's almost kind of a way to having both abstract elements and more representational elements is a way to bring together those two realities. And I think that in a way this is how all of us experience our everyday lives. Every moment is kind of a combination of like what we kind of feel internally and what we experience externally. So to kind of make that visible, both of those aspects visible through painting is something that I think about a lot in the studio.
That's beautiful. And maybe let's go, I'm thinking about one that has more, like, I wonder if you could sort of like talk a little bit more about this work, which is a work that's not included in the exhibition from 2021, but is gorgeous. And I think especially with that sense of sort of that, those sense of sensations, really, which to me is so strongly conveyed not only in what, in all elements of this painting.
Yeah, I feel like it's funny to see this piece right after The Bather, because I think they're almost kind of two ends of my practice in terms of the level of kind of realization. And actually, I was working on the show that I had in London with Victoria Miro, and Bather was kind of earlier on in that process, and this was the last painting that I made for that show. And this is, Bather to me is very much like a quarantine painting where our entire world kind of shrunk to our household, and every experience was kind of experienced there. So spaces became really, really charged, and I kind of wanted to just express that density, I think, through color and chroma. And then in my lap, which is the other painting that you showed, thank you, to me is a much more free painting. And actually, I think this also is maybe one of the fastest paintings that I've made, which doesn't happen very often. I think once a year I get this gift from painting gods, and I make a painting that in 2 or 3 sessions. And I think to me this is much more about kind of a sense of celebration, and also using a rainbow palette, which is something that I've been exploring a lot in my work, and thinking about the rainbow both as a queer signifier, but also a visual experience that takes you out of your everyday life, and kind of connects me at least with, it kind of is a certain connection to nature, but also a really transcendent experience. So in my mind, I feel like I wanted to connect kind of a visual color experience that I have in the real world with emotional experiences within a relationship. So moments within a relationship or with a partner where like our love is most felt, and how could I communicate that through color? So kind of thinking about this like rarefied moment of transcendence in everyday life, of like seeing a beautiful sunset or like seeing the rainbow, and how could that find representation within a relationship?
And in this work, for you, is there a place that's suggested here?
Well, it's funny because when I had it in my studio and I had friends come by, they were like, "Oh, this is on the beach," and I was like, "Yeah, it's on the beach for sure." That's what I meant. So I actually didn't really think of it too concretely, but I think it actually did end up being on the beach. And I just started like 2 days ago this like double panel painting that's going to be in a similar mode. on an actual beach. So I feel like I made that decision and now I'm committing to it. Yeah.
And maybe you could share with people the varying ways in which you paint from sitters and from life and not, and just sort of that process for you in your work.
Totally. So mostly, so most of my work start from paintings from life, which actually I wanted to ask what your process is. But we'll talk about it. But so these are very large. So I can't really make the big paintings from observation. So it's kind of a traditional process where painters would make smaller paintings from observation and then take it back to the studio and then kind of construct these compositions with bigger canvases. And for the most part, I feel like if I'm painting a friend or a family member that most of my family is in Israel, so I don't have access to them most of the time, but when I do, I would paint them from observation. But I feel like with paintings of like my partner, for example, or myself, that would be from photographs for the most part. And I think that the role of photography versus observation in my work really depends on just the nature of the relationship. And painting from observation, besides being just really fun, I love doing it. I think that it allows me to gauge in real time whether I'm capturing kind of the essence of the person as I'm painting them. And it's almost like brushstroke by brushstroke. Like, does this thing that begins to manifest resembles what I'm actually seeing, both visually but also emotionally? And painting someone who's so close to me, like my partner, for example, it's almost like unnecessary. Like he's seared into my mind. So I feel like I could even like a shitty iPhone photo can suffice. So I think that's kind of a process, an interesting process for me. But yeah, I think that and actually I feel like working from observation is becoming more and more important to me. So very recently I showed a painting that was probably the biggest painting that I made from observation. And I'm trying to figure out ways to make these like larger paintings also just from direct observation.
Is that painting in here? You think of the one you just showed it?
No, the very newest one.
Okay, yeah.
It's not.
Okay.
This is also on the beach, though.
Yeah. Maybe, do you want to talk a little bit about some of these, I would say that it's interesting in your work that you will have works that also are absent of figures, that are pure landscapes, in addition to ones that have human figures in them being present. But I wonder if you could just talk about this. This is Brothers, right? I can't quite read over there. Yeah. Maybe talk about this painting and a little bit for you that relationship between landscape and body.
Totally. So actually I have this. Let's see if this works. No, other way. Sorry. Okay. This is really technologically advanced.
Yeah, it is.
Do it. One more. Okay. So this is actually the first kind of foray into landscape that I've made, and I think you saw that in our first studio visit a while ago. And this is set in Fire Island, which for those of you who don't know, it's an island off of Long Island, easily accessible by train and a ferry. And there's two communities in Fire Island that are kind of distinctively queer, which is the Pines and Cherry Grove. And this is actually in between those two communities. So this is the Meat Rack, or Judy Garland Park, or I don't know, whichever one you prefer. It's a beautiful natural setting and also kind of like a cruising area. And whenever I go to Fire Island, I bring like drawing supplies and painting supplies. And I love like being there and like drawing, because I feel like there's something about, to me, like for me to be able to relate to a landscape in the same way that I relate to a figure, it has to connect to some sort of an experience that's personal for me. And I think that the landscape in Fire Island almost feels like imbued with queer desire, just kind of being such an historically important place for queer artists over decades, and literally a place where like people go to like have sex off the beach. So it's a really like, I think that the kind of the emotional relationship that I have to the landscape really motivates my choices. So similarly, Brothers, which is a very different painting, was probably my second landscape painting. And this is set where I grew up in Israel, right after my sister passed away from cancer. So we were all, my brothers and I, which are the three of us are painted, went to Israel for like the Shiva and the service. So obviously very, very different experience, but kind of like equally thinking about a landscape as being not just like a beautiful bucolic image, but something that relates, in this case, to like home and loss and kind of these like deeply human experiences that we can all access in a way. So using landscape as kind of a vehicle for very similar themes that I'm using my figures for.
And maybe you could talk about the next painting. Think about sort of the context of the eroticism in your work and the more kind of, I think the more explicitly erotic, though I think eroticism suffuses so much of the work that isn't as explicit. But I wonder if you could sort of talk about this part of your practice, which has been, I would say in some ways, very defining of your practice in the sort of larger landscape of painting today.
Yeah, I feel like my work really started with these explicit images, actually. And I remember being an undergrad and making drawings from these videos that I would make with guys I would like hook up with. And so it was always very personal subject matter. And for me, I was really kind of holding on to this idea of queerness that was also very identifiable, like undeniably queer because of the representation of like it is the representation of sexuality. And I think that my trajectory really has been to kind of both keep that core as something that like very much motivates and inspires me, but also construct like a world around it that gives context to those sexual images, and kind of thinking about a queer experience as being much more expansive. And that sexuality, like you were saying, like does imbue every aspect of our lives and kind of shifts our view of the world. And I think that you can see that with so much painting, that artists' sexuality, even if the painting is not about being a straight person, like they would use like sexualized women in order to talk about God and war and freedom and love, whatever it is. So kind of thinking like sexuality has such an important role in how we see the world. So I think that like both I wanted to insist on a certain kind of like specificity and directness within the subject matter and not shy away from explicitness, and also kind of provide just like a broader context of how that sexuality exists in the world.
Thank you. Maybe we'll open it up for questions that you might have for each other.
I'll just say, as a non-artist here, I'm so impressed to be introduced to the work that you're both doing, and got a chance to see some of it upstairs and to see it here. It's just striking in so many ways, and I like the themes that you both are bringing out in different ways. So it's a great experience for me to listen to both of you and see a portion of your work.
I think we're impressed
Yeah.
by your work.
I know.
Actually helping people in the world.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Well, I think art helps people in the world too, in different ways. So,
I mean, you talked about this. This I thought was a great question, Doran, that earlier you had talked about sort of the element of activism that I think is present in all of your work in these very different ways. And I wonder, I mean, I think with Bagley, it maybe is easier to sort of immediately see that sense of advocacy and activism. But I wonder for you two, what has for you, felt like the sort of most, or how have you seen the work that you're doing in the studio most kind of directly related to a sense of activism? Or, how does that sort of carry through for you either as individuals, as people, or as sort of representations of something that is larger? I mean, you talked about making sure that you were visible and that your stories and representations sort of wouldn't be forgot, which is obviously one index of that.
I mean, I showed the image of the earlier work. In that body of work, I was really thinking a lot about me as a Latinx person and really exploring the idea of machismo in relation to my community, my family, and understanding my body. So that work was, at that time, was overly, like very sexualized. It was really, but I was that thing, that body, in a sense. And I haven't shied away from certain things, but at times, sometimes don't feel as queer people we have that choice at times. And so either you face it head on and create work that you feel is important to be seen, and also growing up, understanding that certain things are not seen, or certain things are not available, or they're not spoken about or thought about, and kind of ensuring that the future doesn't look that way. And in a sense, and I mentioned earlier, I don't sometimes think about myself as it, but understanding that some of these gestures will be seen that way, and it is because the nature of it. And so I do it because I feel that we need to be seen. And the fact that historically we're constantly erased. There are ways that we made sure that the community is erased. Books are, right now is a perfect example of again, we're living in that time where it's happening again, where books are being taken off of shelves and things are being banned, things can't be talked about. And that's a sense of erasure, erasing of history, erasing of artists, erasing of a lot of things. And so those markers for the next generation are being removed. So then again, the cycle begins again. And so we start, again, a new generation seeking out something that reflects them. And when we're here at this moment. And so in that sense, it becomes a sense of activism. Because you can shy away and do something else, but the need is there. I have the need. And still, I think I always make the work for that reason.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I very much relate with this idea of not necessarily, I don't think of myself as an activist. Yeah. I don't think of my work as political in a way. I think that, to me, there's, just by following my impulses and what I love about painting, I think the work arrives at being political. There's just no way of avoiding it in a way, just doing what painters have done, which is represent their lives, follow the things that they're passionate about, is kind of because I am who I am, it leads to a certain kind of politics and representation. And I think that that's something, that even surprises me in that process. For example, I had a work at the Frick collection, which was kind of the first time where my work was maybe exposed to the general audience and not necessarily people who are seeking out contemporary art. And at least on Instagram, the response was supportive, somewhat. Some of it was very supportive and some of it was really not. And I think that people felt like having work that's very specifically defined as queer within that context was a distortion of history. And it seemed to me that there was a sense of anger that us as queer artists took something from them. I felt that there was a sense of ownership that people had over the history of painting, and really had a lot at stake at thinking of it as a straight white male endeavor. Whereas if you walk through the Frick, there's so many queer looking paintings, every Bronzino painting is so gay. So I feel there's, it's not really about, to me it wasn't about introducing a new element into the history of painting, it was about kind of bringing to the surface elements that were already there for centuries. So I think it was just, that moment was crystallizing for me in terms of understanding that oh, okay, yeah, there is a politics to the work, whether it's something that I was setting out to do in a way.
That's really interesting. Well, I think I want to know that we also have Max's performance, but I want to make sure that we have time for questions from the audience. So maybe we can turn up the house lights, and I understand we don't have a mic to pass around, so I am going to try to restate your question for the benefit of the recording and for everybody to be able to hear. So feel free to just raise your hand if you have a question for any of our panelists. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a member of the Teen Arts Council of the ICA.
Maybe we'll come back to you if you're. God, you've been asking a lot of questions today. Today you led a artist interview with an artist that's forthcoming in our program, so I feel like
Oh,
you've been
wow.
asking a lot of questions today. So you have a pass. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, in the red shirt.
That's awesome. JF and I are both on the Teen Art Council. We're a group of youth, and I'm just so glad that they, because we help plan events here at the ICA for youth, actually to get connected to your exhibits. So I'm just so glad that we get to hear your voice and hear the stories behind your paintings. Especially you, Noah, I would love to hear about how you see your queerness as intersecting with the country that you were born in, Israel, and the culture there, and how if you choose to incorporate that in your paintings or not. I think it's so fascinating.
So the question, just to painfully restate it quickly, is that a question to Doran about your queerness and your connection to your home country of Israel and the ways in which you see that connected or not, or sort of bring those things together.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I feel like I only, maybe in the last 2 years, started painting in Israel. And I think it was after kind of being, well, after my sister passed away, and then also the pandemic started right after, so being locked out for over a year, which I've never kind of been absent for so long and been away from my family for so long, especially kind of like a very precarious time in our family. And I think that that was actually the first time that I had thoughts about, like, what is my connection to Israel? Because, you know, like, I left when I was 21, after high school. I had to do the mandatory military service. And after that ended, I was like, get me the fuck out of here. So I kind of didn't, like, I feel like my Jewish identity has played a really big role for me. My dad, we were kind of talking about it. My dad was born during the war and lost most of his family in the war. So I think that kind of that cast like such a big shadow. And I think that a lot of the themes that I work with that are like very kind of existential and even growing more and more existential as my practice develops, I think come from that place. So I think that that connection is something that I feel as being very relevant. But with a connection to Israel, I feel like this idea of just, you know, I left, and I think I left for a reason, that it was just too, I don't think I could have made the work that I make there. And that in itself is a connection to being Israeli. But yeah, it's a hard question to answer.
You done?
Hello. Well, I have two questions. One for you as the curator and for the artist. When you were planning this exhibition, did you have an idea in mind, or did you allow the artists or the works that they do to guide what we saw upstairs? And for you, because the work that you do is so intimate, it's so personal, do you start creating it because you remember this experience, you want to celebrate your friend, or do you just want to create it for the world to see? I can't tell whether you're celebrating your own life, or you saying this is something other people are experiencing and celebrate that.
So maybe I'll start with a question for you all, which is sort of the impulse to create a painting. Is it for you or more for other people to see? And the sort of driving impulse to paint?
You want me to start? I think that, in a way, at least for me, my work is really based on the assumption that my deep emotional experiences and my relationships, my friendships, my familial relationships is something that everyone experiences in one way or another. And for me to express something with the most amount of, with the greatest specificity will give the greatest access to someone else and the greatest kind of like connect, and I would be able to connect with a viewer in that way. So it's almost like that my friend or my family member is kind of material to talk about something kind of bigger that we all share. So I don't know exactly, I don't know if it falls in the binary of for me or for someone else, but I think it's a combination of both, probably.
I agree. They're personal for many different reasons, but it becomes greater than that. It's the ideas and the things that you want to talk about go way beyond anything that's really personal. And I always say, I'm very lucky they allow it to be a vehicle to talk about certain subjects and certain ideas. Yeah.
And maybe I'll answer your question was about sort of did I have an idea in thinking about organizing the exhibition and sort of bringing it together and maybe kind of how I organized it? Is that accurate? How did I select the artists? Yeah. These guys. I mean, selecting awesome artists is really easy because there's a lot of great art out there. There's also art that maybe it doesn't move me as much. But I would say that the exhibition really grew out of what I saw artists that especially were in school, as I did, I went to all of the amazing art schools in Boston, as I was doing crits with BFA and MFA students. And like probably 8 years ago, I just saw this huge shift to so many of those students that started painting figurative painting. And it was a real, I remember coming out of it, I was at Yale and I was like, wow, this is a real moment, like something different is happening and at that moment I sort of started paying attention, as did a lot of people, and I think there was a lot of kind of attention around this figurative painting, which is one of the most, I would say, kind of predominant trends right now in sort of the art world. And so I was interested in that phenomenon, and I was interested in understanding it. And the exhibition, actually, its very first origin was much smaller and had 3 artists, and were artists that I thought were really exploring the spectrum of masculinities, which I felt like was something that hadn't been as closely looked at or addressed in the same way, especially in our museum where we did a lot of work around women's art and feminism, and I felt like masculinity was sort of this under-examined realm. But I was really lucky to be able to do a larger exhibition here, and so I started to sort of expand that group of people. And I was really lucky, honestly. I remember I met you, Doron. I was so moved by your work, and I asked you artists to, go see. And so oftentimes as I build exhibitions, artists are great sources of information there. So I would invite an artist, I would have a dialogue with them, and then learn from them who they were really excited to see. And much of the exhibition was planned during the pandemic, so I probably did, 35 studio visits over Zoom. Some of the artists I got to see in person, David lived here, but some of them I didn't, get to actually do that studio visit in person. It was really important to me too that these are 8 different answers to the question of why painting figuratively now, and that there wasn't a kind of singular thesis to this exhibition, because I felt like there couldn't be, because I think every artist is sort of answering the question of why they're making their work differently. And I also really wanted there to be a sense of a diversity of styles, but ideas of intimacy, of painting those parts of one's life that are dearest to them and what they love the most were really sort of guiding lights as I thought about who should be in the exhibition, because it was a guiding light for me in the course of the pandemic. So maybe now we will invite Max up to present your work. Thank you so much.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, geez. So my name is Max McClune. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. Before I start, I just wanted to say thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here, to be following these amazing artists and activists and that amazing conversation. David, I especially wanted to say how much I appreciate your work in capturing queer Black and brown bodies. You said it yourself, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So I just wanted to appreciate your work. So I'm going to share 3 pieces with you guys. Yeah, I guess I'll just dive right in. This first piece is called Boy. B-O-I, boy. I dreamt queer. I dreamt gender. He was there in all of his chains and trains and pit bulls and polos and pistols and spoiling my baby girl and fatigues and floral sleeves and dad. He shaved his head recently. Whole lot of dyke shit. And there were others, and we all looked different, but all had one common goal. There was love and self merging at the tight lines drawn just above his beer belly. Dreads in a business suit. I just want to live. And I want black back, and I want to see me. They don't need to understand. Lastly, I dreamt of my kids running towards me as I picked them up from school. There is glee on their faces. I often cry because I raised them and I love them. I cannot remember what they called me as I held my arms outstretched. This next piece is called Rebirth. Deep within the walls of somewhere that something once called home, it lies, slumbering, wings twitching, in swaying dreams, in warmth and closure, in the hope humanity invented to stop surviving and start living. It flows in the water that pounds down onto shaking palm leaves from thick, hot air. It beats the rhythm into a new lover's heart. It sucks the pain from a new wound. It fills you from your feet to the top of your scalp, kind of like drowning. I felt it when I held you for the first time. It makes up the fibers of the old stained red carpet of an AME church. It's the secret ingredient in the candy yams served downstairs in the basement. There's a little bit of it in every star in our universe, and because of that, I am grateful to be in this one. It is liquid. It is total ecstasy. It is sated hunger. It's the happiness you can smell in a dewy field of dandelions. It is not loss, but instead overcoming. I can't stop thinking about your eyes. When you talked, I got lost in them. They were full of it. It gave me goosebumps inside and out. I almost said thank you. Thank you. I have one more. I am struggling to find it in my notes. Where did I hide it? Here we go. This last one is called Text Me When You Get Home. It has been pouring for weeks. The sky is not gray, but stark white and menacing and so impossibly massive that I might cry. And black boys don't cry. Not even when everyone they love dies or leaves. Not even when they don't know what a boy is. Not even when the face of someone who hurt them over and over appears in the storm drain across the street. The rainwater spritzes their sick expression as it flows down past them into the depths of the sewer. It goes much deeper than you could ever fear. I suck it all in and hold my breath forever. My lungs are burning, and my face is wet, and my throat is dry and tight, and my legs are so weak. I think if I lay down here and sleep, the things that make me want to cry will take me. Maybe I won't cry anymore. The rain picks up and the street floods. I am overcome with the dirty river that has taken every bit of this city with it and is now drowning me. I close my eyes so the sky isn't so white. When I open them again, I am home, and I can no longer fight the tears. The familiar sting of chopped onions swirls with the smell of burnt meat and Cajun seasoning. I can hear warm laughter and a mean joke with a light tone and a video game title screen with a tinny tune on repeat as it waits patiently for some attention. My brother, who isn't my brother, notices I'm awake. He asks me a series of questions. Do you want one burger or two? Can you roll me a lavender cigarette? Did I tell you what happened in class yesterday? I smile and mumble something that could have been spill the tea and could have been I love you too. Thank you.
so amazing. I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that our galleries are open until 9, so please make your way up there if you haven't. And I also wanted to say that Bagley has a table in the lobby with information, so feel free to learn more and check in there. And thank you so much for coming tonight.